Paul George, look, obviously fills a great need for them. They needed to upgrade the talent on the wing. They finally got out from under the contract to Tobias Harris. Again, it's going to be different now in trying to find that blend with Tyrese Maxey, Embiid, and Paul George in terms of how they're going to run their offense. But Paul George, no question, answers a huge need in the regular season because you can almost pencil it in. Joel Embiid, at some point, is going to miss 15, 20 games this year. This helps you survive that. Their record wasn't very good last year when Embiid sat. That cost you seeding. That could be a big deal in the playoffs in a much better top of the East. This is a win for the Sixers in a big way.
Tim Legler on what Paul George brings the Sixers. Is it enough for them to pass over the team that knocked them out? Let's start with them before you start talking about the Celtics. We can get into that. A lot of questions have been coming in for Paul Hudrick from Liberty Ballers, as everybody wants to see where the Sixer team stacks up now in the East. They're number 2 in the betting odds on DraftKings in the entire league. Paul Hudrick, let's start there. Did they make that big of a jump in your mind? Is this Sixers team significantly better than the team we talked about last year a lot?
Yes. That's definitive yes. And I do think right now when I look at it, the only team, if I were a betting man, I'll be honest and I'm not, the Celtics are the only team that I would say definitively I would have my money on over the Sixers. When you add a talent like Paul George, and I think it's so odd to say this, that a 9-time All-Star might be underrated, but I think he is. I don't think people realize how good Paul George actually is. This is a great basketball player. And, Mike, when I think about it, you already have Joel Embiid, the guy who was the MVP of the league 2 years ago, probably would have won another one if he didn't tear his meniscus. You have Tyrese Maxey, who at 23 years old is ascending, was a borderline all-NBA player. You're adding to those two a 9-time All-Star, 6-time All-NBA player, and you're asking him to be the third option on this team. And when you look at it, it's like kind of what Legler was already talking about in that clip, like the balance. You have a dynamic, electric guard in Tyrese Maxey. You have a dominant big man post player in Joel Embiid. Now you have one of the best, and he still is, one of the best two-way wings in the sport. Those three, it's a perfect complement on each other. And then when you look at the other moves, which I'm sure we'll get into, that certainly I think they corrected some of the issues they had against the Knicks. So when I take all of that in its totality, and look, things are not that things can change, they will change. The Sixers need to add more players. Other teams are going to do other things too. Let's not forget Drew Holiday wasn't a Celtic until October. So other things are going to happen. But as of right now, yeah, I think the Sixers are significantly better, and I would slot them as the number 2 team in the East right now.
Yeah, a lot of people, it's weird because you mentioned Paul George, 9-time All-Star. He took probably I don't know how you would describe those Pacers teams. He was the best player on them. I don't know who the second guy was. I mean, Roy Hibbert. Right at a time where
was at his peak, Hibbert was very good.
Yeah, at a time when the league he was right at the end when the league was kind of changing, so he kind of phased out right after those teams. They had George Hill, but he took a team to the Eastern Conference Finals as the number 1 player. Is he that level of player today?
No, he's not, and that was the peak, right? Like that was when he was at his absolute best. I think they might have even taken the LeBron Heatles to like 7 games. I mean, he was
2 years. They battled those two teams.
Yeah, he was unbelievable. That was when he was at his peak. That was when he might have been like.
Well, his best year was that Oklahoma City year. He was unbelievable.
He was really good in Oklahoma City as well. I mean, those years, he was like a top 10 player in the league for those years. And no, I don't believe that. But is he still like? I would say almost unequivocally, he's still like a top 25 guy. Like he's still a really, really good player. And I think one of the big things too, Mike. And I get it. The age is a concern. He's 34 now. He'll be 37 by the end of the contract. And he's had injuries. So, of course, all those factors in. He's not the same guy. But as I already mentioned off the top, he is now going to be the third option. And he's going to be the third option. And you look at what like the one thing he still does at a really high level is shoot. He was at 41% last year on almost 8 attempts from 3 per game. That's elite. Like that's like 90-something percentile shooting-wise in the NBA. I mean, that's a terrific number. Still great on the catch and shoot. I think if you look at the numbers, he was one of the best catch and shoot players in the entire NBA. And what is he going to get when he's playing with Tyrese Maxey and Joel Embiid a ton of catch and shoot threes. And look, he still has the ability to create a little bit. He's not the greatest passer in the world. I know a lot of people have talked about that as being one of his weaknesses, and it's fair, but he can create his own shots. There are moments where he can, frankly, still, even at 34 years old, take over games. He is still capable of that. Not as much as he used to be at the days you're talking about.
Yeah. Doesn't need to be there. Right.
Right. He doesn't need to do that because Joel Embiid's going to take over plenty of games. Tyrese Maxey's going to take over plenty of games. You just need Paul George to fill in the gaps for when, as Legler said, when Embiid is out or when one of those guys is having an off night, you might need a little bit more of an aggressive version of Paul George that might, on some nights you're going to get it.
Yeah, I guess. So do you view him as basically stepping into the Harris role, and how do those two guys compare?
They don't. Paul George is just, and look, respectfully, he's just so much better than Tobias Harris. It's not even close. Much better defender. He's bigger. He's got more length. He's much more aggressive player, much more aggressive three-point shooter, a better three-point shooter, can create his own shot more, can operate in like the pick and roll with Joel Embiid. And again, not the greatest passer in the world, but certainly a better passer and playmaker than Tobias Harris. So like, to me, Mike, like, and they've already exceeded this, but if they just simply swapped Paul George for Tobias Harris from last year's team, they were easily in the Eastern Conference Finals playing the Celtics. And then who knows with the banged up Kristaps Porzingis, what that could have looked like. But I mean, there is no comparison. He is such a better player than Tobias Harris now than either of them ever were. Like, he is just like head and shoulders a better player.
All right, Paul Hudrick, Liberty Ballers. I think if you were on the fence of Paul George, even if you don't like the move, that's what I say. Look, you can hate this move and say, I don't like it, they gave him too much money, yada, yada, yada. He's significantly better than Tobias Harris. And in so many different aspects. So just that swap out, if it was a 1-for-1, I think you're right. You beat the Knicks. I mean, you went 6 games with the Knicks last year with Embiid basically on one leg, Bell's palsy. Harris gives you a zero in that game. So one of the problems they had, obviously, was when Embiid left the floor. We've talked a lot about that position over the years, you and I. They get Drummond back, and it was obviously important for them to do so. But how that changes the dynamics of the whole season and how that can play out, and having that guy that you don't have to play Embiid the major minutes, and maybe that it gives him a better chance to get to the end line.
Well, I think you look at last year when they owned, like, Mike, they were so close to trading for Andre Drummond last season. The Bulls, I mean, talk about mismanaging a situation. The Bulls probably could have had 2 or 3 second-round picks for Andre Drummond. Instead, they lose a play-in game, and then he walks for nothing. So talk about complete mismanagement by the Bulls. But that trade was so close to happening. Like, I was told that, like, literally Andre Drummond, like, was telling people, oh, I can't wait to come back to Philly. Like, that's how close it was to happening.
He's been dying for that cheesesteak.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, he did love his time here. Like, genuinely, he loved being here. And I just think about last year, Mike, when Embiid had that meniscus injury. If you have Andre Drummond, who is, look, you don't want him as your primary starting center. You don't want him playing 82 games as your center, but he can give you starting caliber minutes in certain matchups against certain teams. So imagine how big of a difference it would have made to have him over Paul Reed, over Mo Bamba. You throw him in the mix, you probably win. You might win like 10 more games down the stretch. You're talking about maybe being the 3 seed as opposed to the 6, as opposed to the 7 seed, having to play the play-in game and then getting the Knicks. Like, it could have changed your complete outlook of your season. So I think when you just look at it from that context and then you move it to this season where, as you kind of said, even if it's just Embiid missing time here or there, yeah, I'm sure Embiid will feel more confident. Okay, we have Andre Drummond now. So if I have to miss this game, we still have a really good chance to win because we have Andre Drummond at center, because we still have Paul George and Tyrese Maxey. Like, we still have an NBA team that has a shot to beat a lot of teams on most nights.
Well, that's another big point you make right there is when Embiid went out, the team was essentially a lottery team that just made the playoffs because Embiid was so good that they had a big enough cushion to land in the play-in game. without Embiid, they were essentially a lottery team last year. But they had such a big cushion that if they lost Embiid and Drummond stepped in, they're probably a top 4 seed still in that manner there. So they have Drummond now. They had Eric Gordon. Whose role does he kind of usurp now, and how do you see him fitting in?
The obvious one is, I think, Buddy Hield. I think this probably spells the end for Buddy Hield in Philadelphia.
It never worked out, really.
Yeah,
he had two really good games to start off his career, and then his last game, and everything else in the middle was everything else in the middle was.
And look, I really loved the trade when they made it. I really liked Buddy Hield. I thought he was going to be a great addition, and he was just, man. I mean, no other way to put it. He was a huge, massive disappointment in the playoffs. He just wasn't up for the moment. You could see it early on, and then
which Eric Gordon is.
Eric Gordon is not going to shrink in a moment like that. This guy has been around the block. He's seen plenty. He's been in a lot of big games. It's not going to phase him at all. And I think the big thing that Eric Gordon brings that Buddy Hield doesn't is that Eric Gordon can give you something off the bounce, right? Like he's strong. He's tough. He'll put his head down. He'll get to the rim while still adding kind of that audacious stream. Like he's not afraid to pull up from 35 feet and make a shot. So I think that's the big thing too. Like, and again, like when I look back at that Knicks series, one of their biggest issues, yes, it was when Joel Embiid went to the bench, and part of that was Paul Reed, and you're upgrading that with Drummond. But the bigger issue to me is you didn't have enough offense when Joel Embiid went to the bench. You were solely relying on Tyrese Maxey. Now you also have Paul George, and you have a guy like Eric Gordon, who again is just a bucket getter. He can create a shot. He can make a shot. And no, you're not asking him to contribute like high-level minutes or whatever, but as just a pure scorer. Look what Cam Payne did last year against the Knicks, how much kind of juice he added just by being able to dribble a little bit and shoot. Now you're adding a guy like Gordon who can do that, at a, quite frankly, a higher level than Cam Payne. So I think Gordon is going to prove to be a pretty savvy, smart signing.
So they add those 3 new pieces, George, Drummond, Gordon. We like the upgrades, George over Harris, Drummond over Reed, Gordon over however you want to, Hield, Payne, that mix there. I like Gordon a lot, too, for the other reasons, the intangibles. Those Western Conference Finals Houston teams, there were nights where when Harden disappeared, Gordon said, all right, you need me to step in, and he had some monster games there. Now he's a little older, but he's certainly not. What is it?
Audacious. He is going to shoot and he's going to
not gun shy. Right.
Yeah, he is never going to be gun shy.
Getting Oubre back, where does he? And the Oubre thing to me is interesting because at times last year he's like your third guy. He almost now slides down the list from I need to be the third guy because this guy over here is not doing anything. So he slides down to 4, 5, maybe even, somewhere in that range. So he should have a more defined situation this year, the way I see it anyway.
Well, he was the second guy down the stretch of the season
when
Embiid was out. I mean, it was Maxey, then it was Oubre. Oubre was the only guy providing any real offense. And then you saw in the playoffs how Jalen Brunson was desperately trying to get away from Kelly Oubre that entire series. And as the series went on, you saw the Knicks really that's basically what their strategy was. Okay, how do we get Oubre off of Brunson and then let Brunson cook whoever else tries to defend him? That was basically the strategy. But that just shows you how good Oubre was against him, that was the deal. But yeah, look, I love bringing Oubre back, especially that deal is so team-friendly. It could wind up working out for Oubre down the road, but right now that's a team-friendly deal to get a guy like that. And I love the way Morey phrased it at his end-of-season presser. He called Oubre a breath of fresh air. And I think he said that because look at like all the players the Sixers had and the kind of like archetype of players they've had. Kelly Oubre, an athletic guy who can like beat people off the dribble and dunk it. Sixers never get guys like that. These super athlete guys, like they never get players like that. So it was jarring to watch him play for the Sixers team. He was good despite the fact that he's not a good shooter. He was so good with Embiid because he was a really good cutter. He hit the offensive glass. He would finish at the rim, with authority. He wasn't afraid to try to dunk on people and get fouled and get to the free throw line. And I think you're right. Like he does go down in the pecking order, but man, with all the attention that Maxey, Embiid, and Paul George are going to get, think about all the like little backdoor cuts, all the plays Kelly Oubre is going to have opportunities and mismatches and so many opportunities to kind of, fill in those gaps. While also, like, I think the one thing Kelly should get a lot of credit for last year is he did a lot of dirty work. He's a guy who he hustled every night, wasn't afraid to die for loose balls, took on really tough defensive assignments, hit the glass on both ends of the floor. Like, he did a lot of those little dirty things. And for a guy who didn't have a reputation for necessarily being like that and had to take a minimum deal, I thought he showed a lot in that department. So when you add a player like that to play alongside Maxey and Paul George and Embiid, I think he's kind of a perfect mix to kind of add, again, a little bit more energy, a little bit more athleticism to that group.
Paul Hudrick, Liberty Ballers. All right, so that's what they have now. They still have some work to do. What is next in your mind? Where do they need to go from here?
They need a starting four. I think that's got to be next on the docket for Daryl Morey. Who that is, what that is, I'm not sure. I saw there was some Dorian Finney-Smith buzz out there. That's a little tricky if you're going to trade for him now. When you consider the cap space, I mean, there might be a thing where you could get Paul Reed in there and you might be able to work something out. But then you like hard cap yourself. It's complicated. I don't want to bore people with minutiae here, but basically, I think that's the kind of player though that Morey would probably like to have a 3-and-D combo forward that can switch back and forth between the 3 and the 4, that will hit threes, that will be a really tough defensive player. Like I look at, like, let's just say for this example, like you get a Dorian Finney-Smith, man, that would look pretty good against the Boston Celtics when you have to take on Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum, that you could throw Paul George and Dorian Finney-Smith at them. That's a pretty good start if you're them. So again, I'm not sure that the Finney-Smith is the guy that's even doable, but he's that type of player I think would be ideal. And then from there, it's probably going to be a bunch of minimum guys. Surely Kyle Lowry will be in the mix to perhaps come back. If it's not Lowry, I could certainly see Campaign being a candidate to come back. And then further down the line, like we already talked about Oubre, about Buddy Hield. I don't see him as a candidate to come back. KJ Martin is an interesting one. Brian Toporek, who does a great job writing for us, he put out an interesting article today that they could re-sign him because his cap hold is so low, and kind of offer him a balloon type deal and then maybe trade him. So like there are a lot of avenues to go, and I think Daryl Morey is going to explore all of them and try to get really creative in filling out this basically half the rest of the roster.
All right, Paul. So give us Paul Reed's situation and what happens here. He's tweeting or removing stuff. The social media reading tea leaves here. Looks like he feels like something's up here. So everybody keeps bringing him up. What are some of the scenarios that Paul Reed can help them improve the team?
Well, first of all, I think we can all take a moment to laugh at Danny Ainge, because he put that when Paul Reed signed that offer sheet with the Jazz, they put that guarantee in there if the team he's with makes the second round, which the Jazz clearly were not going to do. Ainge thought the Sixers would maybe not sign it because of that. Joke's on him. It worked out perfectly for the Sixers because now Reed's contract is no longer guaranteed. So it gives them a lot of options. They could just waive him and then get the salary cap space, and then they have roughly like $9 million, I think, in cap space if they just simply waive Paul Reed. So if a player comes available that they like, they'll just do that. That's clean and easy. They could also trade him and use that $7 million. Again, I think people have talked about the idea of moving him for a Dorian Finney-Smith. The salaries don't match, but they could trade him, and the salaries they could take on a little bit more. Again, it gets complicated. The minutiae is a lot, but yeah. And then again, if they wanted to maybe get in on another player on another team, someone might value a Paul Reed, an athletic big man who can play a little 4, play a little 5. Someone might value a guy like that, and so maybe he presents value to a team. So yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of ways to go. If I had to guess. And that tweet only adds to my guess, is that he is not going to be a 76er next year. I think one way or another, whether it's they just release him, waive him to get the cap space, or they use him in a trade to acquire maybe a starting power forward. I think his numbers are his days are probably numbered in Philadelphia.
All right, so we're talking with Paul Hudrick from Liberty Ballers. We've been getting a lot of text message questions here. Matt and Cape May Courthouse, a lot of people asking this question: Is there still a possibility that they could be in on Lauri Markkanen? Is there mathematical possibilities there? Or is that now out?
Mathematically, they could do it, but it would get really complicated, and it would be extremely difficult to build out the rest of the roster if you do it. So it would take probably signing again, getting Paul Reed. You'd probably have to give up Jared McCain, who was your first round pick. You'd have to sign and trade him. You might even have to include KJ Martin in that just to fill in some stat. Like, it would take a good bit of stuff, and then on top of that, all your draft picks are gone at that point. Which is fine. If I'm Daryl Morey, I have no issue giving up 4 draft picks for Lauri Markkanen. But then the problem is with the new CBA, it really could hurt your roster building. Now, that's not to say, again, that they shouldn't do it or that it's impossible, but I view it as like extremely unlikely.
All right, Paul Hudrick, we'll get the final answer from you on this one, which we've been asking a lot of our listeners today. Who's better, the Sixers or the Knicks now? The Sixers lost to the Knicks in 6 games. People have a lot of opinions on this, which is awesome. The fact that Philly, New York, and Boston seem to be the 3 teams in the triangle of conversation. Do you think the Sixers have passed the Knicks?
As of today, I think if they met in a playoffs, assuming that the Sixers fill out their roster, I would lean towards the Sixers. Here's the serious thing, Mike. Like, I think if Paul George went to Villanova and Mikal Bridges went to Fresno State, some people in this area would view those two very differently. With respect to Mikal Bridges, who I love, who I think is a hell of a player, he's never been an all-star. Paul George is a 9-time just the weirdness of that gap to me, it's like mind-boggling. And look, the Knicks are going to be really good. There's no other way. Like, they're going to be awesome. They're going to be a really tough team. They're going to be right in the thick of things. I'm curious to see how they intend to replace Isaiah Hartenstein. We all saw he killed the Sixers. He was awesome in that series. He was such a great fit with Brunson, such a great fit for that team in general. So I am really curious to see what they do to replace him. Mitchell Robinson does some things well, but I think there's a reason why Hartenstein took that starting role and why he was so good in it. So to me, until I'll put it like this. Right now I lean the Sixers, but I would like to see, one, how the Sixers intend to fill out the rest of the roster, especially the power forward spot. And then 2, I would say the other thing is I'm very curious to see how the Knicks are going to replace Hartenstein.
I opened the show. I almost said, I don't know if you agree with me on this one. I would have, if I'm the Knicks, I would have taken Hartenstein back and let Anunoby walk.
I would have had to think about that very seriously.
Once I traded for Bridges, did I need both Bridges? It's almost like they are so focused on beating Boston, not realizing that to get to Boston, you had to beat Philadelphia this year. And without Hartenstein, I don't know that you're beating Philadelphia.
And listen, and the Celtics also have this guy named Kristaps Porzingis, which, you're going to need a pretty big player to stop him too. So and look, and I get OG could probably match up with Porzingis pretty well, but yeah, I don't know. I'd have to think about it more, but I think it's a very fair question to ask. Should they have not re-signed OG and focused on signing Hartenstein? I think that's a perfectly fair question to ask.
By the way, Matt Cape May Courthouse chimes in on the Lauri Markkanen and says, Paul, my man, you're saying there's a chance. There's a lot of mathematical stuff that happens, but the stuff that you're
0.0001% chance.
All right, so NBA free agency, the Sixers have kind of made the most noise. Some other things obviously continue to happen, but what will Daryl Morey do next? Everything has kind of been chalk for him. I mean, it seems that this was a plan that started last year with the Harden deal, and everything he wanted to have happen has happened. Is there something wild up his sleeve?
Wild might be extreme, but I think he's got I think it's been a little too quiet, right, after the Paul George signing. So I feel like, and again, the fact that there is a clear need for a starting four. It might not be Lauri Markkanen level, but I feel like he's got something up his sleeve where he's going to net the Sixers a starting caliber four that will fit and make sense for this team.
All right, Paul Hudrick, Liberty Ballers, at Paul Hudrick. The Sixers offseason continues, and we have it for you here on the Sports Bash Live on 97.3 ESPN. Paul, thanks, buddy.
You got it, Mike.
All right, great stuff. Good conversation, and we'll keep it going more as the free agency period continues here on the Sports Bash Live on 97.3 ESPN, the 97.3 ESPN free mobile app, and streaming live video on the X platform at 97.3 ESPN. Don't forget, we've got the Phillies and the Cubs. 4th of July, coverage starts at 1:30, and the Phillies and the Braves Saturday with coverage